Hello, and welcome to Creating a Family, talk about adoption, foster care, and kinship care. I'm very excited about today's conversation because we are welcoming Dr. Eliana Gil to the show to talk about how to prevent sexual abuse in children. My name is Tracy Whitney. I am the host of the Creating a Family podcasts, and I am very excited about this opportunity to talk to Dr. Gil and support families who are raising children who are at risk for sexual abuse and supporting children who have experienced sexual abuse. Dr. Gil is the founder of the Gil Institute for Trauma, Recovery, and Education. She specializes in the assessment and treatment of trauma in children, especially those who've been sexually abused. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a registered play therapist supervisor, and a registered art therapist. And we're delighted to welcome Dr. Gil to the Creating a Family podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Let's set the stage for families right off the bat about understanding why it's necessary to learn about the risks for sexual abuse and how we can prevent it for adoptive, foster, and relative caregiver families.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most important topics, I think, that exists because there are so many children who are not safe and who are at risk from trusted adults, people that they may know, people that they may have relationships with. And children basically go into life and relationships with open hearts, and they do tend to be trusting of others. There's only so much that they're capable of really figuring out on their own as they mature. Obviously, the cognitive piece comes much more into play, but early on, they're really very innocent and susceptible to people who would want to do them harm. And so it's interesting, when I started working in child abuse prevention in the 70s, and I remember the early efforts were really to educate and empower children. And we went out to the schools and we were trying to teach kids just some basic ideas about saying no, running away, talking to someone, getting help. And while I think that that's important for kids to have sort of as a backdrop of here's some things you might try to do, I think that it also puts the burden on the children to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that that was one of many things that needed to happen. And the other one, which is a part of what we're doing here today, is really to educate adults about how susceptible children are and what you're likely to see if someone begins to be inappropriate with children. And so what we now know, I think, and understand pretty well, is that it's very hard for children to come and get help from someone. It's very hard for them to reach out the way we would hope they would, like immediately come and tell us if something's concerning them. What ends up happening is that how parents can become aware of something going on is by looking at the child's behavior and by understanding that sudden changes in behavior really need to be identified and understood. In other words, that you don't look away and say, oh, gee, they're so quiet recently, or they used to like to come out and, play with the other kids or be with the family. Now they just want to be in their room. Anything like that becomes like a sudden change in behavior could be indicative that the child's struggling with something. And then it becomes important for the parents to really kind of sit with them, not start building communication at that point, but to already have kind of a foundation for having conversations with kids and making that kind of a routine part of family life, checking in with them maybe at the end of the day, maybe just having a moment where each of them talks about the kind of day they had and maybe happy things that happened, but also sometimes sharing, oh, and then this difficult thing happened and here's what I did with that. Or I had this big feeling come up and here's how I handle it. So that the parents are constantly modeling and setting that foundation for we can talk here. Sometimes the child just listens and that's fine, but you're modeling that this is what we do here. We want to have open communication. So if that's already been set up, then it's a little bit easier to check in and just to notice with children, you've been really quiet lately, or we notice that you're
Hmm.
wanting to spend a lot more time alone and just interested in that, interested in what's going on in your head, or if there's something that you would want to share with me. And so that's one way to do it, is just to maintain the contact with the child, model, and then have these little check-ins occasionally. I think if people can build a routine around that, I know families are very busy, so maybe once a week having a little get together where everybody just checks in to see how the week is going. Anything like that will help promote the potential of communication and how it can be helpful, so that if parents do end up seeing things they don't understand, they can bring them up. That was a very long-winded answer, but I also just want to say, and then in addition to the families, then there's the next layer, and the next layer is community. And that means people in church or daycare or
Right.
wherever children happen to go, also maintaining sort of a guardianship for children, something that
Hmm.
so that everyone is connected to the child and kind of creates a safety net. And so if we
Right.
can continue to build those kinds of, I'm calling them guardianships for lack of a better word, but some kind of protective net,
Right.
I think,
Buffers.
yeah, then I think the child might do better, especially when they're in difficult situations.
So that all is really great information for a family that has had those ongoing habits of open communication and exposing your kids to safe adults and safe community. We're talking to a pretty specific demographic of families who may not have that foundation because this child is new to their family, or this child has experienced significant trauma and chaos before coming to this family. Trusting adults doesn't come easily to some of our children, especially if they've come to us at an older age and have had lots of experiences where adults were not trustworthy. What are some of the healthy and typical developmental stages that we can be looking at and observing in our children? And then how do we layer on that conversation about our kids' maybe additional risk factors like not trusting adults, or not communicating openly and clearly into
Yeah,
this conversation?
sure. And I think what you say is really important, that in foster homes, you're inviting children in who come from families where there's been just very different habits, very different routines, very different patterns. Sometimes kids have been told repeatedly not to share information with others, not to
Right.
talk to anyone, that they shouldn't trust people other
Mm-hmm.
than the family. So it gets very insulated at times in terms of the messages that kids are sent. And so I think early on, when kids first come into foster care, it's almost like a process of being with and kind of just allowing the child to get the lay of the land, see
Mm.
how communication occurs in the family, notice how there may be routines that they're not familiar with. Might have been they came from a very unstructured family home, and then to have like wake up time, go to bed time, TV watching time may feel really unusual and different to children.
Mhm.
So there's a grace period, I think, where
Mhm.
it's almost like being with them without demands. It's almost like just showing them, kind of walking them through, this is what we do here. Or
Mhm.
if they have other kids in the family, they can kind of use them a little bit to show, she also was a little bit confused at first and now she understands, or something like that.
Mhm.
But to begin to build very slowly, it's going to be very expectable for kids to try to manage that situation in whatever way they can. Some of them are going to act out. Some of them are going to cry and withdraw. Some of them are just going to be observers, and they're just going to be probably cautiously aware of what might be going on. Now, obviously, the younger the child, the more the needs are that need to be addressed pretty quickly. So,
Mhm.
when kids are in those early 0 to 5, they need a lot of direction, a lot of guidance, and also their basic needs have to be met.
Right.
It isn't until they grow up a little bit, start going to school, that they start figuring out that there are lunch times, or that their hunger is dealt with in specific ways, or even if they have to go to the bathroom, that there's a way they can ask for help. There's a way they can do that. So after they get to be 5, we always say 5 because kids go to school, and that's when social interactions
Hmm.
can begin, and also kids learn a lot from peers. Peers are kind of the safest group that they interact with, and so sometimes they're picking up whatever their habits or norms might be. As the kids get older, you can begin reasoning with them, and you can
Hmm.
do logic, and you can give examples, and you can tell stories. But that part doesn't really come into play when they're 2 and 3 and 4, and they may just need to be held, or they may just need to be left alone for moments, where the parent decides to sit next to them and just be present while they're going through whatever emotional
Hmm.
upheaval they may be going through. So it's a question of really introducing the child gradually, um, taking some of the demands away and introducing them little by little, so the child can get comfortable and begin to, quote, trust the situation. There are also some kids who, trust is a funny thing. It gets shown different ways, but there's some kids who come in and hold on to someone's leg and says, okay, are you my mommy forever? And so they
Hmm.
seem to almost want to trust someone immediately, which also can put them in harm's way with others who are inappropriate. And so there's a lot to sort out.
Hmm.
Again, they're coming from maybe inconsistent attachment experiences, where the parent maybe was there some of the time, but not all the time. Sometimes with drug addiction, the parents are physically present, but emotionally not. So there's a lot of things that kids are going to have to check out. I always think with kids, because I've worked all my life with little kids, and again, we over rely on verbal communication, but they come in and somebody might throw something at me the moment they come in the door. And I look at that and I think they're asking a question. They want to
Mm.
know, is it going to be safe here? Are you going to get mad at me? Are you going to throw something back? Can I hurt you? And so all of those questions need to get answered slowly but surely, without being impatient with the child, because that question is coming from deep inside them. So I think, again, being with them, next to them, parallel to them initially is the best approach. And then as kids start kind of letting their guard down, they
Hmm.
start coming towards you in a different way, then I think opportunities for more explanations or more communication might be appropriate. But initially, it might really take a little bit of contact, physical contact. Sometimes just even holding a child's hand can really calm them down a little bit, so that they're less worried and less frightened. Touch is a really powerful kind of regulator, and oftentimes kids carry, like, well, their central nervous system is all agitated in new
Hmm.
circumstances. So it takes a while for them to really begin to calm down. And parents can help with that. They can say, when I feel that, I tend to take
Yeah.
deep breaths, or I tend to just open and close my fists, or I tend to scrunch my face up and then relax it. Anything that begins to give kids things they can do when they're feeling disquieted.
Right. So, what I'm hearing you say is one of the very frontline preventative things we can do is to be present with the child, which that presence includes a lot of observation and a lot of learning that child and maybe what that child's baseline norm interactive
Exactly.
tendencies are. But also, that observation helps us kind of gauge where they are developmentally, mentally, developmentally, emotionally developmental stage, their sexual developmental stage. How are they understanding gender and their own identity as a separate human being from the person they've been attached to prior to this? All of those things that work together to create that readiness for further conversations about sexuality and protecting oneself as we're
Yeah.
teaching them along the way.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
modeling. The modeling is such a
Modeling is so important. And when we're talking about development as an example, when children are sexually abused, their normal sexual trajectory is interrupted by
mm,
these acts that are so inappropriate, harmful, confusing, painful. I mean, there's lots of words you can use there. And it ends up for the child causing a lot of confusion about what was that, and sometimes they start, for example, touching themselves all the time. And it
mhm,
may be because they've been sexually abused, there's an inordinate amount of attention placed on their genitals. Or it may be something like acting out,
mm,
this is what happened to me and I'm showing you, or
right.
I'm not going to wait till somebody does that to me. I can touch myself. And
Yeah.
that might give the child for a moment a sense of being more in control. So it's complicated because you have to sort of try to figure out what is it about this child and this behavior that has
Yeah.
meaning to them. What are they trying to accomplish here? And you can hear everything in my tone of voice, everything that I'm saying is about acceptance of whatever the child brings, because that's what they've figured out in order to take care of themselves so far. So it isn't
Right.
the behavior that's designed to, in any way be provocative to others. It's just that it's a behavior that manifests that they have some kind of need that has not been met. And we're the ones left trying to figure out what can we do and how do we give them something that they need in a way they can basically welcome it.
Right. These challenging behaviors are often not just self-protective, but self-survival.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, how can parents or caregivers start to tell the difference between what may be normal childhood curiosity about one's body? You mentioned touching themselves, and behaviors or expressions that may signal a potential problem.
Yeah. There's been some research done on that, not enough. It seems like it's a topic that a lot of people are uncomfortable about, but there is some research and they show that, let's say 0 to 3,
Mm-hmm.
very self-exploratory. You start changing diapers and the kids want to touch themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just kind of they're curious. They're curious with their hands. They want to stick fingers inside whatever holes they have in their body.
Suck their toes.
Yes, absolutely. But we also can see, for example, that you've got a 2 to 3 year old child, and let's say they're playing and they don't happen to have any clothes on. They may play with something and go, oh, and start sticking at different places, including in their genitals. But what happens is that it hurts. And so it extinguishes that behavior pretty quickly. And so the
Mm-hmm.
child may cry or be startled by that didn't feel good, but they stop doing it. But
Mm-hmm.
when you have child 2.5 to 3 that continuously, repetitively puts things inside their anal or vaginal opening, usually that's a sign that something's wrong. So in some ways, if you see the behavior occurring over and over again, if it's not responsive to directives, because most kids, if they're touching themselves and you come and you give them a ball and say, let's go play catch, that's it. They're away from that behavior. But if you say, let's go play catch, and they go, no, and all they want to do is touch themselves, that persistence, that
Right.
repetition is kind of like a red flag that maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's some reason something is going on. Typically, there are times when kids are masturbating more. For example, masturbatory behavior increases between 3 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then the implication is it suddenly disappears. It doesn't disappear. It's just that kids get more socialized. They go to school. They have guidelines. If they're got their hands under the desk, the teacher is going to want them on top of the desk. And slowly but surely they learn that. But if they're not learning that, then you would have to ask yourself the question, what's going on with this particular child? What do we need to do to try to distract them from this behavior? Or does it indicate some deeper concern, some repetition of behavior that they've experienced? I always think that when it gets inappropriate is when children are crossing boundaries. Sometimes with themselves, they can actually touch themselves so much that they cause damage. They can bleed and anything like that, pay attention to. But if that's not the case and they suddenly start touching themselves more and more and more, and now cross the boundaries, want to touch other people, then you're looking at something that's probably out of the norm.
Okay.
So I would always say to parents, just, is the behavior of your child different than their peers? Is it something that is causing you to be concerned? And the main thing is don't look away completely. That is, don't ignore it, but also don't make it something more than it is. Sometimes parents get afraid that this means, oh, this means something bad happened to the child, or this means they're going to grow up and have this behavior later on. And we really don't have any evidence that shows that it continues over time. But I do think that it rarely happens in a vacuum, that a child develops these inappropriate behaviors, and it can signal that something's happened to them or they're being exposed to something somewhere that's caught their attention. There's access to laptops, there's access to television, films. There's so much inappropriate stuff out there that kids can get their hands on, and that could have an impact.
And that's a hard thing to keep track of when you have multiple ages in one home. Access to an older sibling's laptop where you maybe weren't even aware that they had access or knew how to get into it. It's sometimes terrifying how quickly these young children are learning how to access devices. And it can be a potentially risky behavior to do that. I would add that maybe when you see some secrecy around these behaviors, that would be something to start paying a little bit more attention to. And I also think, just from my own parenting experience, inappropriate or age inappropriate knowledge
absolutely
is another warning sign, another thing that differs from normal behavior, typical behavior. I'm sorry, I'll say it that way. So all of these things kind of put together, again, leads back to parents being very diligent, very observant, and very present when they're concerned about the risk for these behaviors and what these behaviors might mean.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what our response as a parent or a caregiver can and should be when we do suspect that some of these behaviors might be crossing those boundaries, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that part of what I do with parents, foster parents, and other parents is develop language that they feel comfortable with, because the reality is, especially around sexual issues, that everybody comes with their own experience, their own background, and for some people, it's nothing you ever talk about in public, and for other people, talking to children about it may feel acutely uncomfortable. So it's coming up with a language and an understanding of what would you like to convey to your child about sexuality in general. So sometimes people end up with the statement that sexuality or sexual contact is something that happens when adults show each other that they love each other. And so they tie it into love and affection. I always think it's funny, when I was talking to my mom about this once, and she said, well, but you have to tell them it's only married adults. And I was thinking, see, everybody brings their own kind of assumptions about that.
Right.
But families have to come to their own comfort level about what they do want to say. The other is touching yourself. A lot of families feel comfortable saying it's okay to touch private parts of your body because they belong just to you. However, they're private, which means you have to touch yourself in private. You have to be in private spaces. Some people are totally comfortable with that. Other people go, no, we believe that it's a sin to touch yourself. And so we don't feel comfortable saying that. So then it's coming to terms with what can you say. I really believe that being non-punitive is really important. So it's not about punishing. I've seen horrible things happen in the name of punishment
Mm-hmm.
around things like touching yourself or exposing yourself. But I think the job of the parent is to set clear boundaries and simply saying, in this family, we don't do that, or in this home, we don't do that, or
Mm-hmm.
encouraging, keeping your body private is really important to all of us here. It's important at school. It's important in most places where you are. And so then if you keep kind of coming back to that just as a simple statement, that can go a long way because the child is getting reinforced for, okay, I understand what the limits are here. If they can't use language and they can't bring themselves to say anything, then the kids get more confused and they get
Mm.
the message, well, there's something embarrassing about it, there's something wrong about it. And we want kids eventually to become health positive, sex positive. We don't want them to leave experience thinking sex is bad. And even when they have been sexually abused and they've been exposed to inappropriate sexuality, we try to talk about how the adults are the ones who had a problem in their thinking and in their doing. And just like it wasn't okay for so and so to touch you, it's not okay for you to touch someone else. And so just kind of keep weaving in, separating always the behavior from the person. So
Mm.
you're not a bad kid. You're a kid who learned, someone taught you this lesson and you learned it. And now we're going to look at a different lesson. And I feel confident once kids have that ability to discern that most of the time they want to do what's right. They want to be participating in society and getting good feedback from people about doing the right thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Ross Green always says kids do well if they can, and it's up to us to provide the tools for them so that they can. I
Absolutely.
love the point about non-punitive. I also think that that calm, non-shaming response can open up the door to more conversations that can lead to satisfying their curiosity in healthy ways, equipping them to be sex and body positive, but also opening the door if they do need to disclose something harmful happened to them.
Yes.
They have that safe space between you and them to do that, and then to know that you're going to have their back and believe them when it's necessary.
Right.
Are you appreciating the information from Dr. Gil? I find her so supportive and compassionate in this conversation. If you are looking for additional ways to learn how to talk to your kids and keep those channels of communication open and clear and trust building, we invite you to check out our library of free courses. Thanks to Jockey Being Family Foundation, we have 15 free courses that will help you meet your child's needs and strengthen your family. You can find those courses at bit.ly/JBF support. That's bit.ly/JBF support. Thank you. Why is it preventative for parents and caregivers, going back to your points about developing language, why is it preventative for parents and caregivers to use correct anatomical terms with the children that they're raising?
Yeah, this has always been interesting to me because I do think that kids come in and I think someone did research on this. There's like 87 different names for genitals that children use. It was something ridiculous. And
Oh my
I
goodness.
read most of them and I just thought they were hilarious. So for some reason, again, that comes from the adults, right? That comes from our own discomfort, our own
Mhm.
wanting to somehow cover up, or I don't know, honestly. I think the easiest thing for kids is to understand what all the body parts are called, and then you just say the private body parts in addition to everything else. And then they go to school and they're going to encounter kids or teachers who call them different things, but at least they know what it is. And when you are wanting to know if they're safe, or at some point someone may ask them if someone has touched their vagina, their anus, their belly button, their whatever, that they know what that means and that they're
Mhm.
able to respond to it and able to be aware of it. And I think as we do talk about different body parts, it normalizes things too. This isn't like a part of your body that you have to be ashamed of. It is a part that we keep private. So even when we go to the swimming pool, we cover our private parts. That's what we do. So yeah, but it can be confusing, and it can be at times kind of humorous what people end up calling. And I work in Spanish, so in Spanish, oh my goodness, they call it little birds, little turtles. It's really interesting how the lengths people go to not use the correct language. And then that puts kids in a position of being unsafe, because someone might actually begin using that different language, and then they're not aware that there's something going on with, quote, private parts of their body.
Mhm.
So it's confusing for the kids and for the
Right.
parents, I think.
And I think it builds trust with our kids when we give them the actual language and the tools to protect themselves, when they understand that you're going to tell them the truth and you're
Yes,
going to be straight with them. And it builds like that credibility between you, especially if you're welcoming a child that's not ever been exposed to that kind of frank, honest language before. This kid sees you across the board being honest about their open adoption status, or being honest about their court case status, and honest about their body. And when we can build any opportunity that we can take as parents and caregivers to build that honesty and that trust and keep the line of communication between us open and clear, it's just one more layer of reasons that our kids can learn to trust us.
absolutely. Because I think left to their own devices too,
Mm.
kids will make stories up and, remain kind of confused. So I'm really happy you said that, even about their placement status, or when they're going to have to go to court, or their parents are going to have termination of parental rights. All of those are really big pieces of information, and sometimes they're kept from children. So I've seen people who really have so much discomfort, they think it's going to hurt the child. And
Mhm.
yes, there's always kind of emotional pain involved in these big changes in their lives. But I think that the truth, and them being clear that they're going to know ahead of time from you, the trusted person, I mean, that just goes a very long way in building attachment bonds and making sure kids are stable and have the preparation to cope with whatever the
Right,
truth might be.
right. And the knowledge that you'll be with them to cope with whatever happens
They're
in a
not
court
alone.
case, or with their body, or with
Yeah,
their birth parents.
absolutely.
So, on the topic of the discomfort around correct terminology, and we've all been there, it's not easy to just decide to start using correct terminology. Can you give us a few practical suggestions for parents and caregivers to help them get more comfortable with using the correct terminology now that they kind of know the why behind using it, especially if they find it to be kind of an obstacle based on their own upbringing or their own family of origin? Some practical ways to start getting used to using those proper terms.
I always encourage people to role play. And that's probably, from my point of view, that rehearsal, that
Mm-hmm.
getting the words out, the noticing where you get stumped, where you interrupt your what you're trying to say. If you do that over and over and over again, you'll notice that physically you start having a different response. Like when you first start out, you might feel flushed in the face, especially if you're role playing with another adult. Let's say you might feel uncomfortable. It might be visible, but as you continue to repeat it over and over again, it diffuses it. It loses some of its charge. So I would say, always find a friend, another parent, someone that you can practice with. And then, if it's at all possible, to practice with an older child and say, I know we did this when you were little, and I'm getting ready talk to your brother or your sister, and I thought I'd run it by you. What do you think? And so they can do that as well. But I think that that goes a very long way. They can also journal it, write it down, read it out loud, read it in a whisper. And I would say just during the day, just go around kind of allowing those words to kind of come forward. And eventually you're going to get comfortable with it. But you do have to try with other people, because that's the only place where you're going to see where is the place that I really can't seem to get through, and why is that? And so that might lead to conversations about something they were never told, about a way a parent told them that was punitive, or it could lead to any memories around experience that they've had. So I would say, to me, that seems like the best thing. I've done it as a therapist with families, like help them really role play. And we play games, that game where you send the message from one person.
Oh, whisper down the lane.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's really funny to see how people change it up, and then we can all laugh, but we're diffusing the tension associated with it. We're trying to make light of it in some particular way. So all of those things I think can be helpful.
It strikes me as you're saying all that it also diffuses the power that some of those words have maybe had over us in our life story to this point.
Yes.
I would also add, if you are in a partnership, whether it's a marriage or a long-term life partner, practice the language together as much as you can so that you can be on the same page. It's so helpful and builds safety for the kids to know that the parents or caregivers are both on the same page. When they feel like there's not unity between both caregivers, if there are more than one caregiver in the home, it can feel very chaotic and confusing to a child. And this is just one more area where you can build trust by being on the same page with your partner.
Yes, and I agree with that. And I would even encourage people to deliver the message together. And that way the child know I have two resources. I don't just have one, because kids are interesting. It's like if a child comes to therapy and I never say anything about why they're there, they might imagine that why they're there is too embarrassing or too shameful, or I can't talk about it because it was such a big deal. And so I've got a model from the beginning. What did your parent tell you about coming to see me? And then I sometimes hear funny explanations or real ones that make sense. And I go, thank you, that's great. And also, I did meet with your mom. So did your mom tell you what she told me about what happened? And the child may say yes or no. And then I say, let me tell you what I know so far. And this isn't something that we're going to talk about right now. We're going to get to know each other. Some later time, you can show me your thoughts and feelings about what happened, or you can show me by doing sand trays or art or telling me puppet stories, whatever way you want to do it. But that's going to be later. Right now, we're just going to get to know each other, but I want you to know what I already know. And then that just kind of sets a frame for the child, knowing that I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm not hiding anything from them. And I can say it out loud. When your grandfather touched private parts of your body, that was not okay. And then a lot of the kids obviously have really loving relationships to that person. So again, it becomes so important to not say the person is bad, but I always say, when your grandfather made that choice to touch private parts of your body, that was not the right choice. He made a mistake in the way he thought about it, the way he did it. But I can see you love your grandfather. I can see he was a really special person to you. And then that way kids don't have to defend the person, but it is confusing to them that this is the most insidious lesson of abuse, is that people who love you hurt you.
Ugh.
And it's just horrible, because they learn that in the context of intimacy, or when they feel that somebody likes them or loves them, then it makes them feel like, uh-oh, that usually something bad happens. And for foster parents, just really important concept, because sometimes the kids are going to test out that question over and over and over again. And by the way, they've also learned certain interactions that they could repeat in the hopes of getting a strong boundary. So I've worked a lot with foster parents, and oftentimes, let's say a child has been sexually abused by a male, and there's a male in the home. That child might sit too close to that person or might put their hand on their knee. And I've had foster fathers say, I didn't know what to do. That was really weird. I could feel there was something different, because you can feel it. And
Right.
just to be able to say to them, just in a kind voice, say, it's not okay with me that you're touching my knee, but I can see you want to say hello, and we can wave our hands or something, but you
Hmm.
set the boundary and you tell them what they can do instead. And that's really important, because eventually then kids recognize, oh, this is not what's going to happen here. This is
Right.
not what
Right.
this person wants from me. And that just brings a really nice calming effect on the whole body. And they may need to ask that question many times. So it isn't just a one-time thing. They may bring it up over and over just to make sure we're okay here.
Yeah, rewiring their brain for healthy interactions and healthy perspective on their body autonomy and other people's body autonomy. Those are repetitive conversations. Even kids who've not experienced trauma, they need those repetitive assurances of what's okay and what's not okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's look a little bit towards the warning signs that something might be wrong. We kind of touched on them a little bit at the beginning, but let's kind of give a list of the warning signs that something might be wrong when we are raising a child who may have been abused sexually.
Yeah. And again, there's been a lot of research done on this, so
Hmm.
you can feel confident that these behaviors are red flags, and
Hmm.
they may not always point to sexual abuse, but it may be something that the child is trying. So I'm just going to talk about four categories. So the
Okay.
first one is fear and anxiety. So kids who can't sleep through the night, kids who are sleeping under the bed, kids who won't leave the house, any of those kinds of, they almost feel like phobic responses. I can't
Hmm.
go to school. I can't be alone with another child. And especially if these are departures from what has usually been the case. But even if they're not, if the child comes into a home and this is a primary presentation, they're just worried about everything and bad things are going to happen. And there's sort of, we talk a little bit of in the attachment world about internal working models. And all
Mm-hmm.
that means is that kids have learned what to expect from others. And so with kids who've been abused, they've learned to see the world as dangerous. And so
Hmm.
they kind of feel like it's only a matter of time before somebody's going to hurt them. Because of that, they have anticipatory anxiety, like, when's it going to happen? And they have signs of anxiety, like a child who hears a big noise outside and just freezes in place. And it takes a long time for them to reorganize that
Hmm.
we're in a safe environment. So fear and anxiety. The second one is depression. And depression, again, looks many ways, but
Hmm.
it sometimes is a withdrawal into self. It's a wanting to be alone. It's a wanting to be in my room, not wanting to interact, feeling sad,
Mm.
thinking sad thoughts or saying them. Like I've had little kids who say, I wish I could just go to sleep and not wake up. And that's kind of a way that little kids start talking about suicidal stuff. And it means
Right.
just that option has entered their world, that they're
Hmm.
thinking it'd be better if I wasn't here, or things are never going to get better. So that kind of depression, pessimism, lack of hope, that can be a big sign that something is really wrong. The third one is sexual behaviors that are problematic. These are kids who they're sort of tunnel visioned around sexuality. So they draw pictures of penises. They say inappropriate, explicit things, like you were saying earlier. They have information that most kids their age don't. So they'll go and they'll explicitly talk about, or they'll show it with a doll, like this part of the doll goes here and then this happens. All that explicit information, the sexual preoccupation, the constant crossing boundaries, all of that is indicative usually. especially the explicit information, can signal that this child has had an experience of some
Mm.
kind. So I think, again, another big area for us to pay attention to. And then the last one is dissociation. And simply put, it's just a way that kids kind of figure out to not be there when bad things are happening. I had a little boy who was 8, and he was physically abused probably once a week really badly.
Mm.
And what he would say to me is that when his dad was around, and he could almost know from the way his dad drove the car to the driveway whether he was upset. I mean, that's how good he got at his little spidey senses telling him I'm in
Mm-hmm.
trouble. But he would tell me that he'd put his fingers up against the wall, and then he'd say, and then as soon as I touched the wall, I just went inside it. And then when my dad was hitting me, I didn't feel a thing. And I've seen kids who are sexually abused, and they'll say, I went into a crack that was in the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and then I wasn't there anymore. And it happened to that other girl.
Mm.
These become very confusing statements in a legal setting because the kids are saying the opposite of what you want them to say. They're saying, I wasn't there. Understanding this ability kids have to dissociate,
Right.
I think, goes a long way to understanding that it's possible for them to go on a chandelier and look at what happened to
Mm.
them, and now they're confused about who am I and who's that. And they
Right.
don't remember it well because dissociation by definition is an altered state of consciousness.
Mm.
Now, a foster parent could walk in and see a child that's looking into space, and they come right in front of them and the person doesn't see them.
Mm.
That's a type of dissociation. People go very deep into their mind and far away because they're feeling threatened by something. Those four big categories, I think, are worth mentioning. And then the other one that I think we need to pay attention to is attachment. And that is, do we have kids? I've had kids come into the first meeting, put their arms around me and say, will you be my forever mommy? Can I stay here forever? Can I come every day?
Mm-hmm.
So there's no sense of what a relationship is, and they want too much. Those children will be in harm's way with an inappropriate person who looks at that behavior and says, the child's coming on to me. So it gets really important for, I think, all of us to make sure that the kids begin to get what is and is not okay in terms of how you send signals for your needs, how you express affection. You know, a kiss on the cheek is fine, but you don't put your tongue inside my mouth. I used to have
Mm-hmm.
a kid who grabbed my breast every time he came in. And I would say to him every time, it's not okay with me that you touch private parts of my body, and I won't touch private parts of your body. I can see you want to say hello, and we can shake hands or slap five or whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
do. And it took quite a while, and eventually he stopped. And I could see him, he would go, oh, that's right, you don't like me touching your private parts. And I would say, no, and it's just not okay between people for that kind of touching to happen.
Right.
And it's repetition over and over and over again. And you can hear my tone of voice. It's never, that's gross, that's ugly, don't do
Right.
that, it's wrong. You know, if people interject that, then again, it can shame the kids. It can make them feel like they're really bad. There's something wrong with them, as opposed to just, you learned this behavior someplace, but we're going to try a different behavior, a more appropriate behavior. So those are the big ones that I think,
Yeah, they're big.
yeah, that I think
Yeah.
people can respond to and can notice and can say the child needs additional help. And
Yeah.
sometimes they bring them to therapy just to make sure they're okay. And that's my favorite case, is when I can say, well, they're struggling with a few things, but overall they're really doing very well. And how about if you and I meet, and I'll just give you some coaching ideas, and then you can go and
Yeah.
kind of deliver those to the child. So it's my favorite case.
Oh, it's good to hear the hopefulness of that.
Yes, exactly.
So if a caregiver or a adoptive parent or foster parent suspects abuse based on those 5 categories that you just shared with us, what are their next steps? Where do they go from there?
Yeah, and this is interesting in that there are options, but the first one I think is always the social worker that you're working with, because
Hmm.
every foster parent has a social worker,
Hmm.
and just to bring it to their attention and to say, what are your thoughts? What should I do? How can I help the child, et cetera, et cetera. That's one way to go. I think if that person is really convinced, and maybe the child has started saying, I learned this from so and so, and he was touching me. If you've got a reportable offense, and I know foster parents always get that information, but if you get reasonable suspicion that there's abuse going on, then it needs to be reported. And sometimes here you get into maybe the social worker is going to say, yeah, let's not report it yet, or it's too soon. If that person still thinks that it's the right thing to do right now, I would go ahead and do it because it's a
Hmm.
different department that you would refer to. It would be Child Protective Services.
Hmm.
And, these are important steps to take because it's the beginning of being able to look at what did happen and what do we need to say to the child about what happened so that they understand. Sometimes foster parents also talk to teachers and they check in with them and say, how's he doing at school? Are you having any trouble? Sometimes the kids in school settings are sent to the school bathrooms in duos, like
Mm.
they go two at a time. And if
Yeah.
a child has a sexual behavior problem and they're being sent to the bathroom with another kid, that's very high risk. So
Right.
I always encourage people to just let the teachers know the child is exploring boundaries right now, and we're working with them on getting more clear boundaries. So as they do that, you'd appreciate it if they don't send them except with a teacher. And so little things like that can actually really be helpful if people are comfortable doing that.
Hmm. So if you're an adoptive parent or a relative caregiver and you're not working with a social worker any longer, where would you go to report?
Yeah, I mean, if you basically don't have that relationship to someone else and you
Hmm.
feel reasonable suspicion, then you do have to call Child Protective Services
Okay.
and or police. Sometimes they work together. Sometimes one call will refer to the other. But
Hmm.
then it is a matter of someone who's trained to speak with young children to come in and do an interview and try to find out what in fact is on their mind. And it's usually once they start feeling trusting and comfortable, and they've also had a chance to see that what happened to them isn't typical. And then they begin to go, that happened to me and it doesn't happen here. And it might allow them to come forward. But at that point, you really need to talk to a professional. The social workers sometimes refer to therapists. And that's another step that an adoptive parent could take is say, I don't feel like I am comfortable. I don't know exactly what to do. Let me get a consult with someone and see what they would recommend. So that would be another person. But the main thing is to do something because you can, spare the suffering of the child for a while here if you
Hmm.
can make interventions that work for the child now.
And it doesn't matter how long ago you suspect the abuse happened. If you suspect it at all,
Yes,
go ahead and take the steps to, if nothing else, it tells the child you believe them and that
absolutely.
you're always going to be there to protect them because that's your role and that's your job.
Yes.
Once you've taken that step to report to the proper authorities and you've got the process moving for what comes next, what is the parent or caregiver's role in the child's life at that point?
Again, I think of it as supportive role, as being with, as someone who somehow is a beacon of light in some way, that they're able to summarize things. I love that at the end of the day, at the end of a session, sometimes just saying, we did this today.
Hmm.
And we did it because it's important for you to know that it's not okay for other people to hurt you. And we did it so that that person can't hurt other people. And so we also did it so that you're not confused any longer about what is and isn't okay. And so if you can just say things like that and then just be available to the child emotionally and send signals, we care about you, that in a way, reporting does send that signal or can
Hmm.
send that signal, hopefully, if everything goes well. But I think you're the support, you're the anchor,
Yeah.
you're the person the child eventually will start coming towards.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That was the anchor was the word I was going to use. So you're protecting them, you're reporting the information, you're supporting them, and you're giving them that safe place to come back to and
exactly.
say, here's what mom and dad did today to continue to protect you and support you, and welcome back to home that's safe and secure. And we will always believe you and we will always take care of you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What are some everyday preventative practices that we can put in place in our homes to keep our children safe while also allowing them to grow in healthy ways? Because we don't want to parent from a position of fear, but we do want to protect them from sexual abuse and, as much as possible, prevent instances of sexual abuse in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is to be cautious and not paranoid. And caution means that you know who the neighbors are that the child is going to go spend 4 hours with, that you know who the family is where your child is going to go spend the night, that if you're sending them to swim class, that you know how they're getting in and out of the changing rooms and who's
Right.
going to help them with their clothes or all that kind of stuff. In other words, it's a monitoring job. It's just anticipating that where there are other people, there could be danger, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't so. I don't think in the old days that we worried as much, but now almost every position of authority has been abused by someone. So
Mm-hmm.
it used to be we would say they can go to church and pray, and now there's so many priests and pastors who have been found
Right.
to be pedophiles. So we just have to be cautious. That doesn't mean you don't ever send them to church, but it does mean that you're checking in. How was your visit with so and so? What did you do? What did you all do today? And again, monitoring behavioral changes. Do they come back happy? Do they seem
Mm-hmm.
carefree? Or do they come back and do they look stern and go into their room and don't want to talk to anybody? So you begin to learn to read your child and the ways that they have of showing that they're okay or not okay. But that's the role that we all have to take. Even for me, and I was working in child abuse prevention all my life, one of the coaches started giving my son extra super duper expensive shoes. And that was a huge red flag to me. And then the person wanted to take my son on a weekend kind of trip somewhere, but there was no tournament. And then that's when I went, okay. And I went to visit that person and I told them who I was and where I worked. And all I want you to know is by the next day, the person disappeared. So something was going on
Mm-hmm.
there, but we
Mm-hmm.
just have to be attentive. And as excited as he was for his new shoes, I was going, who gives a kid $300 shoes?
Right.
That's not okay. So things like that.
Yeah. So open communication, presence, supervision,
Monitoring. Yep.
safe boundaries in the home would include what kind of things?
Safe boundaries around privacy.
Mm-hmm.
There comes a time when kids are uncomfortable taking baths together, or when you notice that they're old enough, 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, where they're starting to notice each other's body differences, where they sleep and how they sleep together or not together. You just kind of want to be careful and
Mm-hmm.
not overstimulate the children. And also, in terms of older siblings, what's their level of activity in the home? Do they have friends over? Are they drinking? What are the kids exposed to? And
Mm-hmm.
so just kind of again keeping the spidey senses awake and making sure that you're doing your very best to create the safest environment possible.
And that goes hand in hand with teaching conversations about consent and respect
Yep.
and protecting your body, keeping your body private, respecting other people's rights to keep their body private as well. And a big one that I think sometimes we forget about the value of it, but it because most of us are just living it, it's the value of modeling healthy relationships, especially if they've got a history of very unhealthy relationships.
That's one of the blessings I think that foster families can provide. It's like a gift to kids
Yeah.
that they get to see what a healthy relationship can look like because it
Yeah.
provides them with a template that they haven't had. and some possibility. Once you have that template, you can imagine yourself or visualize yourself in a positive relationship like that. So that is the gift that many of the foster parents and adoptive parents do provide to kids.
Yeah, I've heard it said that kids can't dream what they can't see.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that doesn't just go for careers and callings and professions. It also goes for, I can be a healthy, well-adjusted adult. I can be a healthy, well-adjusted mom. I can be a dad. And seeing that lived out in front of them gives them, it just expands their ability to see what they can become.
Absolutely.
Are you looking for the most current expert-based information to help you be the best, safest parent or caregiver you can be? We invite you to subscribe to our free newsletter. When you go to creatingafamily.org/newsletter, you can choose any of our downloadable guides as a thank you for subscribing to our free monthly newsletter. We're very excited about our newest guide called Navigating Challenging Behaviors: Practical Strategies for Families. And if you found today's information from Dr. Gil useful, supportive, and helpful, please leave a rating or a review and let us know that. We appreciate any time we hear from our listeners. So I'd like to know what advice you might give to adoptive, foster, or relative caregiver parents about protecting their kids from sexual abuse. Like, what's kind of the one thing that you see is the most practical advice they can hear?
Well, I think that being attentive, again, is probably the most important thing, just being cautious. And, I think for all of us, we develop a kind of skepticism about how safe other people can be. And we also have to work against being too skeptical so that we're afraid of everything. So I just think, again, you go to the park with the child, you keep your eyes on them. You don't drop them off for long periods of time. If you know that they're going to spend the night somewhere, that's a big deal. And kids do get abused in other people's homes, that you know who that family is, you know what their habits are. And even sometimes when you do know, just making sure ahead of time that the child knows what to do if they don't feel comfortable, that they can give a call, that they can have people set up these words, I forget what they're called, but that you can just call and say, subway. And that's no explanation needed. I'll be there in 10 minutes to pick you up. So just always maintaining those channels open so that kids know what they can do. Because oftentimes in abuse, they're overwhelmed with not knowing, well, what can I do right now? Can I run? Can I get out of here? Can I leave the house? Where do I go? So to walk through some of those scenarios, should you ever feel uncomfortable, make sure your phone is always with you. Make sure that here's a word we can use. Anything that prepares kids for these strange, sudden, potentially traumatic experiences, they know what to do. I think any and all of that preparatory work is really important.
Yeah. And learning the balance of being vigilant and then hypervigilant when you need to be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Gil, for, first of all, your commitment to supporting and caring for children who have experienced sexual abuse, and for your time here today to help us learn a little bit about preventing sexual abuse in the kids, for the kids that we're raising and caring for. We deeply appreciate your wisdom and the fact that you took time to come with us today and talk on this conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.